really recognize
That's
that
their
stuff.
style. Yeah, but now I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's definitely a style. So
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, they've got their own approach,
I think we should all have our own approach one way or the other,
right?
in some degree. Hey, welcome to the big story. I'm Alex. And today we've got Jim Zub, who holds the
Hey,
record with the shortest name. This is
I
cool.
do. Is this the shortest name?
It
Wow,
is.
is
Well,
it?
you beat Jim Rugg. You got,
Just barely.
you
That's
got
right.
one letter up on Jim Rugg, so that's pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah.
That's
I was wondering when you said holds the record. I was like, oh, what are we
he was like,
talking
oh,
about
this
here?
is
Fast. What record are we talking about? What are we getting?
the trophy's in the mail. So
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
it's a classic no prize trophy.
Keeps it simple, makes finding the Twitter handle easy as well, Yeah, that's how
Totally.
we do
Oh,
it.
I know. It's like such a blessing. Like it's so funny. Like I have a pretty different, not a common name with Morrissey, and like I got everything there was to get except for just my basic URL,
Right.
and it's like, and some kid in Jamaica has it, and I've been
Okay.
so upset by this one thing.
Well, I'm sure they would be upset if you had gotten to it first. So, the
True. I
race
mean,
went
I
to somebody.
got everything else,
Yeah.
it's this weird sort of like
But it
goal.
does feel strange if someone has the same name as you and you feel
It
like we
does.
have a bond and yet I know nothing about you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Totally. Well, it's like this weird sort of alternate reality twin.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I'm sure, like, I have a friend whose name is Dave Smith, who I joked for decades that he had like the worst witness relocation program crew. They were like, I don't know, Dave Smith. Let's just give him the name Dave
And
Smith.
yet, because it's so common, maybe it's brilliant
It,
because
oh,
then, yeah,
yeah,
you'll never find them. Yeah.
sure. Like there's 700,000 Dave
Right.
Smiths
You're
around.
all good. You're
Yeah,
good.
he's safe as houses.
The John
Um,
Doe of John Does. Yeah.
Totally. I grew up there was a Zub family in my hometown growing up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
I
Well,
know.
mine is a pen name. It's short for
Hmm.
Zubkovich, which is
Oh, okay.
Ukrainian. Yeah. So,
Oh,
but no one could remember how to say it properly or spell it properly. So, in the style of Stan Lee, who was Stanley
sure.
Lieber, we just hack the
Yeah,
end off there. Everyone called me Zub anyways. Like my friends in high school, there were multiple gyms in school, so it was always Zub this and Zub that,
yeah.
and same thing with college. I think the weirdest thing is as it became kind of propagated for my professional career, like everyone just says Zub. So my
Mhm.
editors will call me Zub, and marketing people or whatever. And I'm talking, and so there is a weird familiarity, like everyone's my friend, because that's
Yeah,
what I'm so used to them, the way I'm used to them saying it. But
yeah.
yeah, it's nice. It's nice.
Yeah, when does that come into play when your last name becomes your first name, like in just discussion?
Well, it's a thing. So it actually was sort of christened by I'm trying to remember how it all kind of came about. It was sort of weird. One of my earliest conventions, actually. So I went to San Diego Comic-Con 2002,
Mhm.
and I was out for dinner with, God, it must have been like James Kachalka, Scott McCloud, Leah Hernandez.
Okay.
So Leah Hernandez, I think, said to me at one point, she's like, everyone's got a nickname, or they've got a name that we would know you as in the industry. We can't call you Jim, because
Right.
if everyone says casually in conversation in the comic industry, Jim, currently what at that time, and still I think to this day, you'd mean Jim Lee. So you're like, oh, I was out for dinner with Jim last night. If
Yeah.
it was the 80s, you'd mean Jim Shooter, because he
Sure.
was the editor in
Just
chief
the
of
alpha
Marvel.
Jim.
Right. It's whoever's the alpha, right?
Yeah.
So if you said Neil for a long time, it would have been Neil Adams. And then
Yeah.
eventually it shifts over to Neil Gaiman.
Yep.
If you say Frank, you mean Frank Miller.
Yep.
So if you can talk casually, oh, yeah, I was hanging out with Frank. You're like, oh, of course. Like, who doesn't, I guess, right? So she said that you'll never get Jim, so you need something else. And so I actually said, well, all my friends call me Zub. And she goes, good news. No one will take it. It's yours. So I was like, all right, great. And that it just sort of stuck from there. It was good.
Nice. Did anyone pull any poppers and no horns?
No, there was no
Ceremony?
musical notes or Heaven's Chorus or anything. It was just that was how it went down. And she was right. It's really useful actually when people are talking. It's funny too, because sometimes people will be introduced to me just through the name, right? They'll just say, oh, this is Zub, he
Yeah.
does Dungeons and Dragons and whatever. And they're like, cool, man, cool. And then someone eventually will say Jim, and they'll be like, oh no, your name's Jim. I was like, well, yeah, but everyone just calls me Zub anyway, so it's fine. It's fine. It works.
Yeah. Well, it's a good moniker in the terms that it is completely notable.
It is notable. It is
Yeah.
notable. Yeah, it makes it easy.
Short.
Nice short, can be a punctuation, it can be a swear. It's great.
Yeah.
So,
No,
you're just like, what has he done now? Yeah.
it's
good.
firm but not aggressive.
That's right. It's playful. It's
Yeah.
it works relatively
Yeah.
well. So
It's nice. And it's like if you were like a nemesis, it's a good one too of Zub, you
Zop,
know?
I
Yeah.
will destroy him. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm sure if there are other writers who would love to do Dungeons and Dragons comics or something, they probably use it like a curse now.
For sure. For
That's right.
sure.
All those fantasy books. Oh,
I was
die.
just reading the Word Bros themselves they're putting together a real interesting Dungeons and Dragons-esque
Yeah,
indie project that they let me read, and it's
cool.
a very clever idea. So pretty happy.
I mean, Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role playing games are bigger than they've ever been. It's a very surreal place to be.
Yeah,
Growing up, playing D&D and going through the satanic panic of the 80s and all that stuff, and being used to like having to hide your dice and don't talk about these things and amongst most mixed company.
dude.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Like I was a little kid, and it's like the late 80s, I mean, late 70s, and we used to go over to my dad's college buddy's house
Mhm.
and go watch the University of Michigan games. Like that's what we
Right.
did on Saturdays in the fall. And I go there, and he had 3 boys, and they weren't there. And like they were always there. And I'm like, where are they? They go, oh, they're upstairs, and they're playing some sort of game. And I was like,
Right.
okay. So I went upstairs, and I just sat and watched, the older boys play
Mhm.
D&D for the whole day. And
Right.
I'm like, oh, this
That's
is
how we used to do it. They were marathon sessions. We
oh
used
yeah,
to
they were
I
never
would go to one of my and when I was in high school, there was my buddy Chris. I'd go to his place, like Friday night, we'd start a game up. We'd play until literally people were falling asleep, and
Mhm.
then we'd crash out and then wake up the next morning, and he'd make breakfast, and then we just keep
Go
going.
right back into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were obsessed. It was amazing,
It was so I mean, I'm so thrilled that like the popularity of it has just, exploded.
It's
Uh,
incredible. It is a surreal thing to see it coming back in such force, but I
yeah,
think it speaks to a broader trend in terms of people don't just wanna be force-fed, passive entertainment, like, show me stuff."
yeah,
They wanna engage with their entertainment. That's what, fan art and fan fiction and all the social media kinda discussion around,
yeah.
storytelling and properties and pop culture, that's what that is. It's an
Mhm.
engagement. They wanna be engaged with it rather than just be passively entertained,
Well,
right? And so
it
I
was
think
wild out in
it's part of
comics.
that broader trend, yeah.
I mean, I mean, I wanted to draw Spider-Man. I wanted to read
Right,
stories of all these characters that I've loved. Why wouldn't I want to go do that? So
right. Well, and I think it's something too where, there's a certain amount there's a collector mentality where you're like, "I love a particular character." And
yeah.
then there's also a mentality where you shift over and you basically go, "Oh, I like the character when these people are writing or drawing it. Like,
Mhm.
those are the specific ones that I want. Wait, I'll read anything that person writes. I'll read anything that person draws." Now you become a fan of the creator. When you see that little credit box and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it becomes real to you and you're like, "No, no, I prefer those ones." Like, I
Yeah.
don't just want, an average issue of X-Men. I like it when Paul Smith drew the X-Men. I like
Sure.
it when, whatever, Mark Silvestri or Jim Lee or whoever, that kind of thing. Or
You
I
mean Jim?
like it. Yeah. Any of these. Right. Right. Jim, Big Jim. That's right. Any of these, kind of characters or creators, like the specifics, there were certain issues that stood out to me. And I didn't know until years after I was enamored with those issues that it was a specific artist. And then I
Mhm.
became kind of fell deep into the fandom for those particular creators, whether it's, Arthur Adams or Michael
Mhm.
Golden or whatever, Tom McFarlane or any of that kind of stuff. You just
Yeah.
become very, and in a modern sense, I'll hunt down anything that Becky Cloonan draws, right? Like,
Right.
because it's
Oh,
phenomenal,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
you know, stuff like that. Like those are the kinds of things that, oh, that creator's involved. You've got my attention. Let's
Yeah.
go. Let's get it. Yeah.
It was an interesting thing when I went my first year in art school. I have to say, like the first 3 days of being in art school, I was walking through the dorm floor, and there were these guys sitting in like the corner. So there was kind of an octagon shape, it's bigger, so
Right.
everyone could sit around. And they were sitting there, and they all had comics, and they were all like talking about it. I'm like, oh, these are my people, you know. So I'm
Right.
talking to them, and they were going through the Marvel universe things, and they would hold them up, and they would go, "Oh, Ron Friends," and
Oh man.
they
Those are
able,
totally my people too.
and they were
So
naming
yeah,
all the artists like right off
yeah,
the top of the head,
yeah.
looking at who what, and I'm like,
My brother and I were obsessed with the
oh
official handbooks of the Marvel Universe. I've literally got them right here on the shelf behind me. The 80s collections of them. I love those to bits. Because, you know, at the time, back issues were, you know, for a kid in the 80s, they were crazy expensive. You'd never be able to get those original stories, and they
mm,
didn't have the kind of trade paperback programs that
yeah,
they have now. You might track down a reprint of Spider-Man's origin, or if you're reading Marvel Tales, you'd get some of those early issues. But for the most part, the only way you could kind of experience those stories was through characters telling you about their old adventures with the little asterisks, and it would say back in whatever issue, or
ish,
the
ish,
official handbook of the Marvel
ish
Universe.
4. You're like,
Yeah,
ish 4.
right? The official handbook of the Marvel Universe has got it laid out like an encyclopedia. And because it does, it smooths out all the weird edges. You know, instead of it being whatever, 20 different writers and all their weird ass ideas on the page, it makes it sound like it's a cohesive story that was being told.
Oh,
And so in my head, it was a cohesive story that was being told. It was a very organized and codified kind of thing. And so, you know, one of the things that sort of changes when you start working in the Marvel Universe and you realize you can just create stuff and it gets heaped on, you know, you just added a new brick to the house of ideas or whatever, and it just gets thrown in the pile with all the other crazy stuff. And if few other writers like it, they might take it and tinker with it and mess around. And it's not as well organized or as codified or as perfect as it was in your mind when you were a kid, but that's what makes it really fun, is
yeah.
your ability to, you know, to grab hold of it and just sort of add little pieces and make it a little bit of yours and a little bit of someone else's, you know?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, and I found it to be like this huge, you know, wealth of like idea generation. Like because you could go through it and you go, wait a minute, I remember reading about the so and so character, and they too had this connection. And then you could
Right.
like do some research and go like, hey, you know, you could come up with a story that kind of combined this, that, and everything. And
Absolutely. I love taking those little funky threads from disparate parts of the Marvel Universe and just sort of tying them together or
oh,
making them more, you know, interesting or cross-pollinating them. It's one of the most fun parts about doing these, you know, stories. It's been a joy. Yeah.
well, I think that's yeah, I mean, it's a huge thing. So I mean, you obviously are of the same sort of cloth as I in that
Right.
respect. So where were your earliest like connections to comic books
Comics.
like you can remember?
I mean, my older brother is like my kind of proto all my
Oh,
nerd stuff,
yeah,
right?
that's
So he was into superhero comics, he was into fantasy, he was more into sci-fi books than I was. I was more into the sword and sorcery for sure. And then we both fell in hard for Dungeons and Dragons. So like all those things we were pretty lockstep on, and I was very much like obsessed with the same kinds of things he was obsessed with for the most part. It wasn't until kind of I'm in elementary school and he's going into high school that we get a little bit more kind of individual taste on those things. But even and so what we would do is we'd sort of like split the Marvel universe in twain. We'd try and get, you know, as many books as we could a month so that we could keep track of stuff. So I
sure.
loved collecting Spider-Man. I loved the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. And my brother collected all the X-Men and all the related stuff around there. We'd sort of take turns grabbing Hulk issues or you know, Daredevil now and again, if a cover grabbed us or a particular storyline was really compelling. We try and grab as many anniversary issues as we could because they had big fancy covers. And we're like, well, those are important,
Yeah.
you know, or whatever else. Right. So we were just buying up as much as we could and then grabbing other stuff from flea markets or used bookstores or things like that. And so we just read up a storm as much as possible. And what was so exciting about it was because you're getting dropped right in the middle of it. I'm start reading Amazing Spider-Man in sort of the early mid 200s, issue 200s. And so I'm buying backwards because the back issues are relatively cheap unless they're special issues. And I'm buying forwards at the same time. So I'm just slowly kind of enriching myself on crazy Spider-Man history and stuff like that. And then doing that with other characters as well, trying to grab really cool issues of the Fantastic Four, or trying to grab really cool issues of the Avengers and fill in those little knowledge gaps as much as I can, or reading up on the official handbook of the Marvel Universe and then being like, that storyline sounds awesome. And just, going back and trying to hunt them down for prices that wouldn't, bankrupt little kid me or whatever. I liked Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1 a lot because every issue was a different team up story, and so you got to see all these different characters from across the Marvel universe, really weird ones, and you just be like, this is awesome. I don't know who this character is, but they seem super badass, and now I'm a fan of them as well, just sort of falling through all these different kind of eclectic parts of the Marvel universe.
That's where you meet Wood God. I mean,
right, all the weirdest of the characters, whatever. I distinctly remember there was a storyline that now I think it's collected as Project Pegasus. And it was like all these funky, strange characters. It's like Hal Foster, the Giant Man. You've got I forget what they were in calls, like a bunch of these Amazonian women that were like running around smashing stuff. I thought they were super cool. There were also the Cosmic Cube and the Man Thing and all that stuff. I was just like, this part of the Marvel universe, the weird stuff, like the supernatural stuff and the stuff that's just off the beaten path, that was the stuff that really grabbed me. Deathlock and all that kind of stuff. Those were cool.
That was the thing, like the 70s era, like I said recently, is that the 70s era of Marvel was like the Grindhouse movie era.
Yes, it was just the weirdest stuff, and but fun, like always fun, always interesting, always visual, and something neat about it. It was interesting. This was years ago. I ended up just I was set up at Fan Expo Canada next to John Byrne, and he hadn't done that many conventions in years. And of course, everyone's bringing him all these seminal issues of X-Men to sign and all this stuff. And I didn't want to fanboy out hard. We had little conversations over the weekend, and I realized on the last day, if I didn't get something signed, I was going to kick myself.
Right.
So I didn't bring Man of Steel. I didn't bring any of the big seminal stuff. I brought like a few issues of Marvel 2-in-1 and a couple issues of Fantastic Four that I really enjoyed. Yeah. And he liked that. He liked that these were just like these kooky issues, like just strange, issues of the Marvel 2-in-1 stuff. Yeah.
Right. I think one of my earlier ones with him was he did like a Hulk story in a Marvel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And like I remember getting that.
John probably runs on almost every major character, right? Like he did a Cap run, he did FF, he did X-Men.
I still think his Cap run is one of the best.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? It's just brilliant stuff. And so consistent, that's what's so great about it. Like that became kind of the Marvel look to me. Yeah.
Is he still Alpha John?
What's that? I don't know, because he doesn't do a lot of conventions and stuff. I don't think he's
John Romita Jr. isn't John. He's JR.
Yeah. He's John Jr. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I now that you mention it, I am not sure who would be Alpha John off the top of my head.
I don't know. That's a good question. We should start a website of the of comic.
Right. We got to codify this and make sure that the fans know, so you can sound like, totally.
Right. So proof. It's funny that it's funny, if Marvel could make money off of back issues, they would have done, a more sort of extensive version of the universe, because then they would have had like all the footnotes.
They do make money off the archives when they're doing the trade paperback programs, right, when they're doing these archives.
So like,
and that's what was so crazy about it. There were only a handful of trade paperbacks. Like there was a Long Shot trade paperback.
Oh, dude, that was
like Death of the Phoenix trade paperback. Like these weird ones that they would, this specific storyline you could get. You could get Kraven's Last Hunt as a collection. That was like one of the only ones you could get. Yeah,
that nice airbrushed cover. Yeah,
that's right. Right. Cool stuff.
It was interesting. Yeah, well, that Long Shot one, which was done I think in the late 80s, but that was like Arthur doing a painting, and it was so crazy. You're just
like you were so used to his his line art stuff and that crazy detail on it. Yeah, it's so great.
it was very cool piece. That he was a real sort of change up, like that mid 80s change up. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? Like it was
Yeah, and it was also artists no longer trying to do the house style. It was
Mhm.
artists really, really kind of doing their own thing. I think
Yeah,
guys like Michael Golden kind of pioneered that element of it, whereas like don't try, obviously you Jack Kirby and your Steve Ditko, they can't kind of hide who they are. But there were a lot of these sort of journeyman artists who were just sort of, mid-list doing their thing, and
yeah.
you could recognize their stuff, but they weren't necessarily like blowing it out. You know what I mean? And then it was like, oh no, style is kind of everything,
It's yeah, I mean, I
It,
think
it ain't just for Bill Sienkiewicz, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the thing was that's what happened. It was like, I think, the Arthurs and then the Todds, they saw Michael and they were like, oh, that's different, and I really like this. Not that
Yeah.
I don't love John
Yeah.
Byrne, but I
Yep.
like this, and it just blew up at that point.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, like, so you're totally into it, but like, so what do comics, like, how do you frame them in your sort of experience? I mean, like, we've already admitted that we were hiding, our
Right.
our nerdy.
I couldn't really hide the comic book fandom. Like I was pretty into it, but it's weird because I never attended comic conventions or
Okay.
things like that. I grew up outside of Toronto, little city called Oshawa. We had 3 comic book stores in the boom of comics, so we had a lot of choice, which was great. Um, and like everyone, 1989, you go see the Batman movie, so you're obsessed with Batman for a while, and like stuff like that. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on that kind of indie wave. And
Mhm.
then my brother, actually, he went off to university, and a bunch of these kind of programming and engineering students had come to University of Waterloo from Japan, and they brought a bunch of their comics and animation with them.
Oh, wow,
And
okay.
so my brother rode the early kind of wave of anime fandom, and I kind of fell into that with anime and manga, where I was like, oh, there are comics about everything. Like,
Yeah.
and I knew there were indie books, where you
Yeah.
could read slice of life stuff or biographies or things like that. But for whatever reason, the North American ones didn't grab me, but the Japanese ones did. So all of a sudden it was like historical comics and romantic comedies and all sorts of different genres that I just hadn't seen in comics before or in animation before really, really kind of blew my mind. And so I was, caught up in that sort of wave as it was emerging, like, fan subtitled stuff from people taking Japanese laser discs and copying it through, a really old crappy computer, adding subtitles and then outputting it onto VHS and then
Wow.
trading these tapes with other clubs. So this club is going to, they're going to subtitle Record of Lotus War, which is like this
Oh,
fantasy
yeah.
epic.
Sure.
And then these other guys are going to fan subtitle Bubblegum Crisis, this cyberpunky sci-fi series, and then we'll trade. And so if your club does one series, you end up getting 5 because you've traded with all these other clubs in different places. Yeah,
Oh, that's pretty cool.
it was pretty wild.
So what, yeah, I mean, what are we talking about? Is it, let's 90-ish around?
Yeah, we're talking 1990,
Yeah.
1991 kind of era there. And
Yeah.
so, Akira is blowing people's minds, but only it's like you've heard of it, but it hasn't been released in theaters anywhere or anything. So you're just
Right.
like hearing about it and someone's got a bootleg copy and you're watching it with no subtitles and you're just like, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
And then Epic ended up, like Marvel's Epic imprint ended up doing Akira in
Totally. It took
English.
forever, but they did it.
Yeah, they did it, and we collected those as well because our
Yeah.
minds were so blown from the
Well,
from the
Marie
movie.
Marie Chavins, she was the one who was finally, they handed to her, like, "You have to finish this thing." And
Oh
it's like,
my god.
it just took her forever to get,
Well, it also I think it was Olaf was coloring it, and he was doing Spawn and all these other things as those blew up, so I think that they couldn't afford to pay him like Todd was, right? So I think
right.
that was the other thing, and Otomo agreed to doing color, but only if Olaf colored it, I think. Yeah, yeah.
It's I mean, it was interesting. I mean, and Otomo had very sort of strong,
Sure.
his needs were
Yeah, of course, right? Well, you've got the equivalent, whatever the manga equivalent of Watchmen or Sin
yeah,
City or something on that level.
yep,
You can make decisions about how you want that to be released and in what
totally.
format, and that's how that stuff goes, man. When you've got that kind of
Oh,
cultural footprint.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
No, totally. Yeah, I was in art school in the late '80s in New York City. So like
Nice.
we got a hold of, of all that stuff real quick because it was
Yeah, it was
part.
a wave. It was really exciting stuff. And so my influences are really all over the map. It's like superhero stuff and then early Vertigo comics and then manga and indie stuff. Like it's just sort of a little bit of everything. And then when I'm in college, the internet's finally starting to come into its own. But even then, like my first year of college, you didn't have to have an email address.
Right.
Like
Okay.
it wasn't until my second year of college where we all got assigned email addresses, and you'd check your email like once a week. And it would just be emails from other people you knew who are like, I have email now. And that was it. Like,
Like that's the email.
it's a little hard to describe to people. You're like, you
Yeah.
go into the internet and the first websites are just people mucking around and just trying to make things. And
Oh, for
and
sure.
and these big discussions about these, entertainment companies like early X-Files fandom, where they weren't sure they wanted to let fan pages use the logo because they didn't want people to think that these sites were official or something.
Right.
Yeah. Because everything looked like crap. So if yours had even a whiff of professionalism, it was as good or better than, what the actual companies were putting online.
Which
Right.
is
So,
still kind of the same when it comes to the internet. Like there's very few people have, the leg up in that
oh,
realm.
sure. But it was a fascinating time, these
Oh,
discussions about, well, who's even using this stuff anyways? And who's
right.
looking at it and what's it matter,
Well,
and this kind of
we
stuff.
didn't know what we were doing. Like,
No,
I
no,
mean, like most of us didn't know what we were doing. We were
sure.
just kind of like, oh, this is something. Oh, I found a chat board and they're talking
Yep.
about something I'm interested in.
Yep.
Let's talk.
And that was the thing, the first time I used the internet was going to visit my brother at the University of Waterloo, and he takes me into this computer lab. Takes him like 15 minutes to log on to this is pre, World Wide Web. So this is like just chat room BBS stuff. And he's showing me like recreation.arts.anime. And it's just like people posting topics. And I'm
Wow.
just like, oh wow. And so I thought it was really neat. And so because I didn't have internet at my high school, my brother would literally, if there was a really cool discussion, he would print some of them out and he would like bring them home for me to read. And so I'm
Totally.
like reading BBS feeds, like just bizarre stuff in the nascent internet.
Right. And that's on the impact printer. So just,
Yeah, exactly. Right. With the got to tear the little holes off the sides and all that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuff.
No, it's
Well,
cool
that,
stuff.
and I would read some of the early manga that way. People would post up translation scripts.
Oh,
And so
really?
you'd get an original Japanese manga and it would say page 1, panel 1, here's the dialogue, sound effect, here's the thing. And so I'd have the Japanese manga in my hand and I'd be looking at it and then I'd look at the printout and then I'd go, oh, okay. Oh, that's funny because that guy's name is a pun for bread. All right, cool, or whatever. And you just read and read and read and read. And it was like you had this weird underground language of this whole other comic, kind of
Right.
scene that you were diving into. And even if someone was a comic fan, they couldn't read this stuff, but I could, it was just like this
Oh,
fascinating thing.
totally. So
Yeah.
what are your earliest kind of ideas of sort of creating stuff? Because like, I mean, like beyond
Sure. Yeah,
like,
you're a fan for all these years, but
yeah,
I never thought I could make comics because I knew, I don't know what it was, like this weird feeling of, well, there's only what, 3, 4 people on the credits of a comic, and
yeah,
it's not going to be me. Like there's just no friggin' way. And
okay,
so, and I've also got this weird idea that, in order to work for Marvel, you've either got to be in New York City
right.
and go up to the office, or you've got to be brilliant and British. And I'm like, well, I'm neither of those things.
Well,
So
Canadian, you're like fifth, you're like
yeah,
in there.
but I'd never heard about Canadian comic book creators,
Yeah.
let alone ones that were breaking in. That's why Todd McFarlane was so mind blowing, because I found out he was from Calgary, Alberta, and I was like, what? He,
Right.
he draws Spider-Man and he lives in Calgary. What the
Oh,
hell? Like
Burn, man.
that's
You guys at Burn,
yeah, but Byrne never bragged he was a Canadian. He never
oh,
bragged he was a Canadian. That was not
yeah,
like a big part of his identity. And I wasn't reading like, the Comics Journal and that stuff
yeah,
at that age. So I wouldn't know like the deep backstory. And you can't just look up a Wikipedia thing, right? Like, so John Byrne he's American as apple pie. I don't know. Like I have no idea until way later, you know. And so for me, it's like creating comics wasn't even on my radar as a possibility. But animation, I was super obsessed with as well. I loved, everything from Looney Tunes and Saturday morning cartoons and the Batman animated series and anime, obviously, all that stuff. And I saw the sheer number of credits of human beings flying by on the credit roll. And I'm like, that's a realistic dream. I can be one of those, names going up the thing, right? And on top of that, I had seen this documentary about this animation school that was in just outside Toronto called Sheridan, and they had graduates who had gone on to work at Disney and Warner Brothers and all these different studios. Some of them, there were some guys there who were doing 3D animation. One of the big pioneers who did like the special effects on Terminator 2, he was a Canadian guy who went to that school. And there were a bunch of these key animators who were working for Disney who were from that school. And I was like, okay, well, this is a place I can go, and this is a thing that I can do that I love, and an art form that I really want to learn, and I want to do something creative, and I draw, this is something I'll dig into. And so I went to school. I applied at a high school, didn't get in, went for a year of film. But during that year of film, I was learning about editing and cinematography and photography and all this other stuff. I wasn't drawing. Wow. So of course I wasn't going to get in again. I was an idiot. I just spent a whole year working on other stuff. And then I was like, oh crap, I gotta get a portfolio together. And sent, marginally better stuff than the year before. Didn't get in again. Okay. Then I was like, okay, do I want to do animation? Like, am I serious? Because I totally just messed around for a year. And I love film, and my parents were sort of like, you're good at the film thing, like just stick with it. And I was like, no, if I don't do animation, I'm going to regret it. So I took an art intensive program to sort of get my skills up. And then on my third try, and I told my parents, I was like, third strike, if I don't get in, I won't do it. Right. I got in, and then I started, okay. So I did classical animation, like Disney style animation. And midway through my program, we saw the huge wave of computer animation. Like Toy Story came out while I was in school.
Oh, which is heartbreaking, huh?
Yeah, we all looked at each other and went, "Oh crap, we are literally dinosaurs. What are we doing?"
You're walking along with, pulling, and then some guy goes by with a cart,
Yeah, like, and we're just like, "Oh no, oh no." Yeah. And so I was terrified. I was really, really worried I wasn't going to be able to make a living at this, not knowing that 2D would survive in all sorts of different ways and future technologies. So out of second year in animation school, I went off to a friend of mine. He tried to start his own studio. So I did that for a little while. And then I jumped around to a few other studios doing TV animation stuff, just like real kind of slam it out thing. And, that early in your career, you have unless you're absolutely brilliant artist, there's no way you're going to jump to the top of the pack where you're designing the main characters or you're coming up with stories or any of that stuff, let alone directing or any of that kind of thing. So I could see like, this is many years away that I'm going to have any influence whatsoever on what I'm working on. Like, I'm just a cog in the machine, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm drawing a lot, and I'm enjoying the camaraderie of the studio and all that stuff. But I want to tell stories. Like, I don't just want to, passively wait for this stuff to happen or only be executing on other people's visions. Yeah. And one of the things I discovered once I had my own computer and my own internet and stuff at home, web comics were this thing that I had discovered. People were posting all these, most of them were like newspaper style strips with a gag every day. Yeah. But the earliest Penny Arcade and PvP and all this kind of stuff. And it was amazing to me because I realized these people were just doing it completely independently. They didn't have publishers. They didn't have any sort of formal system. They just made stuff because they wanted to make it. And then they would post it up when they finished one. Maybe they had a slight archive so that they could keep, a regular schedule. And that was it. And I was like, I can understand this stuff. So I figured out basic HTML and I started making my own comic in the evenings. So I did about 10 or 12 pages as a buffer. And then I started posting 3 pages a week. And this is 2001. So I'm posting like Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, I'm posting a thing. And mine was a horizontal format, so it fit the monitor, but it wasn't a gag-driven strip. It was like a dramatic story. And so you would get one new page every couple days. And I was teaching myself how to use Photoshop because we hadn't been taught very much of that in school. I was figuring out HTML. I was posting up stuff and using templates and making my own website and getting that stuff out there. And slowly but surely, kind of, people were reading it. I thought just posting it up my friends and family could see it, and that would motivate me to keep doing it, because there was that sense of and then actual like strangers started reading it, and you start getting, fan mail, not like a ton, but like you're getting messages from people and they're reading it and they're enjoying it and they're sharing it with people. And you suddenly realize, oh, there's this very organic kind of thing happening here. And so I started it in September, and then December, I'm taking a break for Christmas and New Year's. And I post this message on the front that's like, here's the new page. I'm going to take 2 weeks off for the holidays. Please come back. I promise I will update in the new year. And I know it's not always perfect, but I do these in the evenings after my day job, and I'm just trying to get this stuff out there. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm just doing the best I can. Like, it was just this total classic artist kind of self, just beating myself with, just doing the best I can. And I got an email out of the blue from Scott McCloud.
Oh, okay.
And Scott McCloud sent me a message and basically said, you're doing great. It's, we're all enjoying it here. Just keep it up. And don't be so hard on yourself. I was just like, oh my God, the Understanding Comics guy just emailed me. And so I emailed him right back. I'm so sorry, Mr. McCloud. I'm doing the best I can. Like, it was like just the same kind of message.
Cut, paste.
Yes. Yeah. And he just emailed me back like minutes later. And he was like, don't call me Mr. McCloud. My name's Scott. Here's my phone number. Give me a call. And I was like, what the hell? And so I phoned him, and we had this amazing conversation where he was like, I'm seeing all this amazing content online, and I feel like there's a whole burgeoning kind of other industry that's happening in webcomics. But practically, like, almost everyone's doing humor strips, or they're doing pop culture stuff, and you're just telling a story and posting a new page every couple of days. He's like, there's not very many people doing dramatic stories or doing like essentially an online graphic novel. Like, he's like, you have an ending. I was like, yeah, I have an ending. He goes, other people are just doing it like Garfield, like they're doing their own kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he goes, I think that's really cool. You should be part of this conversation. And I'm like, what conversation? He's like, this conversation, there's a community that's sort of forming. There's people talking, and there's people, putting this stuff in front of other people. And he goes, you should come to San Diego Comic-Con. And I was like, there is no way I can go to San Diego Comic-Con on multiple levels. Like, I've still got student debt, up to my eyeballs. I'm not going to, I'm not a professional. I can't get a badge. I have nowhere to stay, and I can't afford a flight. You know what I mean? And Scott was just like, oh, okay. And so he started introducing me to all sorts of people. And discussion started up from there. And all of a sudden it was like, there were people in San Diego who were making webcomics, and they're like, well, you can just crash on our floor. No big deal. I've never met these people, and they're offering me somewhere to stay. And then Scott, San Diego was much smaller than it is now. He just contacted Comic-Con and said, oh, this guy's a working professional. And so they accredited me. So I had a pro badge, and then I just needed a ticket. And so there was no way I could afford a ticket for the flight. And I told my older brother, I was just like, Joe, this is insane. The Understanding Comics guy and I are talking. And he was just like, what? This is amazing. It's so cool. You've got to go. And I was like, I can't afford to go.
Right.
And so I called up my dad, and my dad is not nerdy at all, doesn't understand any of this stuff, never has really. And he just says, I know you don't know any of the stuff Jim does, and you're terrified that, he's going to be a starving artist or whatever. But if he doesn't take advantage of this opportunity, he will regret it for the rest of his life. And so my dad just said, okay, and put a plane ticket on his credit card.
Wow. And
so I was flying to California to meet people I'd never met. Someone picking me up from the airport who I didn't know what they looked like. They had to send me a real grainy photo over old garbage email. And I was crashing at people's houses and hanging out with a bunch of comic book people who some of them I'd talked to over email, and that was about it,
Well, what was your, that's all really freaking amazing. And like,
right.
And I feel like we all, if we can dig in, we all have these kind of amazing sort of like moments where people are like super beneficial, like in
transformative in ways that you never could have imagined. Yeah.
And so like, how do you frame it? Like, okay, here I am, I'm going off to San Diego, which you clearly know what San Diego was, because everyone knows what it is. And you get there, and you're sort of in this wave of kindness.
Right.
Claudine has handed you a pass, and you're now like
Right.
part of the in, and yay. But like,
Doing a thing.
but how do you frame the moment for yourself when you're there, and how do you say, like, how do I fit into this? Like, what is that for you?
I think it was just this idea of, oh, all of these people are very much like me in that broader sense of they're just really excited about art and storytelling. They don't have it all figured out. Even some of the most, notable people in the industry, they were very warm and they were very inviting and they were very excited and just like making stuff that they wanted to make. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, that's what I want to do. And as much as I love animation, even the crappiest piece of animation is either going to require tons of people or a lot of money. And
Mhm.
it's like a comic is very immediate in that sense of I could just make this thing. I could
Yeah.
just collaborate either on my own or work with a handful of people and we could do it. You know what I mean? And so suddenly that felt a lot more like I could get my hands around it. And
What's
and it wasn't as scary as I thought it was,
And did that, I mean, so how did that, like, affect your point of view towards, what you were your career was as an
Right.
animator? Because
Well, what I realized was very quickly my head kind of changed in the sense of saying, look, I got into animation for the same reasons I got into comics. I got into all this stuff because I want to tell stories, because I love storytelling, right? And I wanted to get into the story department on animation. I
right,
wanted to create films, whether it was live action or animated. I took film because I wanted to tell stories, because I wanted to make things, right? And so what is the shortest path to that? What is the best way, or what are these opportunities that are kind of popping up in front of me? And all of a sudden it was like, well, with comics, I can do this, I can make this
yeah,
happen. You know what I mean? And so that was suddenly very immediate. And yet when I finished that first online graphic novel, it was called The Makeshift Miracle. And I did about 180 pages to finish the story. So it took me, I don't know, about 2 years, maybe a year and a half. I should have just rolled right over and done another thing.
mhm,
But I had this weird kind of paralysis where when I was doing it and no one was paying attention and I was just doing it for myself, or I thought maybe my friends and family. And then once I started it, it was already happening. So I had to keep doing it. But
right,
when I broke that chain of doing, I kept thinking, well, the second one's got to be like the first one, warts and all, I could figure it out as I was going, and no one was going to expect anything from me because, well, he just built it himself. And then it
right,
was this weird thing of, even though I didn't have a huge audience, there was still this sense of, well, the second one's, I'm not an amateur anymore. Like I've gone to Comic-Con and I've done all this stuff and I met all these
there's
people.
expectations now.
Yeah, I've got to make this amazing thing. I've got to make this
Right,
artistic thing. And so all of a sudden I found myself in a rut where I couldn't make it anymore, where I was just like, well, I need more experience. I need better training. I need more time. And I could
mhm,
give myself 100 excuses for not why I shouldn't be doing it right now. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And
totally,
and so I took all sorts of other animation jobs, and then I found myself back in Toronto, and all of a sudden I was going to go back to school for 3D animation, but an opportunity popped up with a friend of mine where I started working at an art studio called Udon. They were doing commercial art and illustration and design work and comics, and I started off there literally doing coloring on comic book stuff. Hilariously, I colored a bunch of the Dark Horse reprints for Conan the Barbarian that they were doing.
oh wow, okay,
And that was in theory, one of my first credited published
that's
things
hilarious.
is coloring.
Yeah,
And then I started doing a bunch of other illustration at the Udon studio. And then I'm very fastidious and organized. So I was helping the studio organize a bunch of projects. And the next thing I knew, I was project managing on a bunch of these freelance gigs that we were doing. So I was sort of finding the right artist for the gig, or I was helping plug in stuff. And I wasn't writing. All of a sudden, it was like the animation job all over again. I was executing on other people's visions. I was doing other people's stuff. But the
mhm,
money was really good. And I was tangentially connected to all these things I love. We were doing artwork for video games. We were doing artwork for animation, artwork for comics, artwork for tabletop role-playing games. And so I was like, well, I can't really be mad. This is all the stuff I grew up on, and I'm getting paid to do it. And so I did. And I really, really enjoyed it for a while. But in the back of my mind, there's this little kind of gnawing sensation of,
Tell a story.
why aren't you telling stories? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Why aren't you making stuff? Like, you're executing on everyone else's visions and you're doing a really good job and you're getting the attaboys and
Yeah.
you're making money and you're paying off your debt and you're going to conventions. But I would go to conventions and I would be the guy looking at portfolios, hiring artists, or I would, with the head of the studio, or I would be going to these corporate dinners and we'd be talking about corporate things instead of creative things. And it's like, I'm plugged into this world, but man, I'm really not enjoying parts of this. You know what I mean? Or
across the aisle, like, oh, wistfully
I'm the editor on these other books,
Yeah.
watching other people execute on things
Yep.
and being like, trying not to be that guy who's saying, well, I could do it better.
Yeah.
But kind of thinking that at the same time, like, this story's good, but I mean, it's not, I mean, it's fine,
It's not
like,
great.
yeah. So
Yeah.
every so often the studio would get a project where the client would be like, oh, we need you guys to do the story and the art. And I would always jump in and do the story. I would always write the thing. And the clients were like, surprised, like, oh, this is pretty great. Like, they're expecting like baseline commercial thing, and I'm throwing down tons of ideas for them or whatever.
Totally.
And even my boss at the studio is like, oh, you really love this. I was like, yeah, I want to write, I want to collaborate, I want to make things, And so I did that for years and I learned a ton. And in retrospect, it's all helped my career in massive, incredible ways because I learned what everyone else does in the pipeline at different points of time. I was illustrating, I was coloring, I was editing, I was doing graphic design, I was doing pre-press, I was doing marketing, I was doing conventions. Like, every role that you need in publishing in comics, I had done at some point in time. So whenever we worked with a client or worked with an artist or a creator, I knew what their job was and I knew how to communicate well with them. And that has paid dividends to my writing career in incredible ways. But I was executing on other people's stuff.
Yeah.
And so 2008, I think it is. I'm doing this for like 5-6 years. I haven't done a story since Makeshift Miracle wrapped up in 2003. So like 3 years of just paying down debts, and I'm in the business, but I'm not where I want to be in the business. But you can't complain because how many other people would love to do anything in this business, right? And so you're like, you've got this feeling in the back of your mind, like, don't bitch, like, don't be a whiner. Yeah. You're involved in all this stuff. You're traveling to these conventions, But every so often I'd be at the table and the artists we were working with would have lineups, and there would be people that would come by the table and say, oh, when's so-and-so going to be there? And you're like, oh, later on. They're like, cool, thanks, man. And you're just like, I'm their boss, right? Like, I make sure they get paid, but no one cares about you. No one cares about, I'm the hardworking, backstage manager. Like,
people care about what they care about. That's
sure.
The thing, it's like, it's the adage of the 90s with the comic industry with Neil.
Right.
And every, like, all these young women would come in and go, hey, is the latest issue of Sandman in? And they would go, no. And they go, okay, thanks. And they would leave. And like the guy, the store was like, but we have all these,
amazing other books. Yeah. But it's like, one of the artists I was working with, he got an offer to do a short story for an image anthology called Pop Gun. So this artist, Chris Stevens, I'd worked with him. He was phenomenal. And he's like, he wasn't signed to any exclusive with us, but I was giving him work constantly. Yeah. So he contacts me and he basically said, hey, is it okay if I do this? I was like, yeah, man, do it. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you. He's like, cool. And then like a couple days later, contacts me again. He goes, I thought they were going to like give me a script to draw. They said I can do whatever I want. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. It's so cool. And he goes, I don't know what to do. I was like, what? And so we just chatted on the phone. And I said, well, what genre do you want to do? And he's like, oh, sword and sorcery. I'm like, my favorite. And so we just chatted for, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes and came up with a story and we were laughing about it. And he's like, cool, I'm going to go do that, man. I'll give you a special thanks. I was like, all right, take it easy. And he hangs up the phone and all I'm thinking is, God, I'd love to write that.
Right.
And then like a day later, he contacts me and he goes, I tried to write it down, but it was way funnier when you said it on the phone. Do you just want to write it? And I was like, yes, I do.
Oh, wow.
And so I did this 10-page story that we did in Pop Gun Volume 2 called Two Copper Pieces. And it was about these mercenary jerk kind of fantasy guys, and it was very much in the mold of like when you used to play D&D when I was a kid, and you would just bulldoze through the story that the dungeon master wanted you to do, and you
Oh,
do
totally.
your own dumb shit because that was way funnier.
Yep.
And it made me laugh, and it made Chris laugh, and we made the story. And awesome. Felt so good. It was years since I'd written something and executed on it with someone like this, and being able to just make my own thing. And we
Right.
had an absolute blast. And so immediately they started working on Pop Gun Volume 3, and the editor's like, we would love to have you guys do another one. And I contacted Chris and I said, do you want to do another one? He's like, I don't know, man. I don't think I have time. I can't do 10 more pages. I said, we could do it in 5 pages. He's like, can we do it in 3? I was like, we can do it in 3. So I wrote like a 3-page story, and he did it, and it worked out really well. And then Eric Larson had taken over as editor, publisher at Image.
Mm-hmm.
And he contacted us out of the blue and basically said, this is one of my favorite stories in the book. You guys should make this a regular series.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, we could make a create our own comic. Like we could make our own comic. And Chris had tons of money problems and all sorts of things like that. And he was just like, I can't do a monthly book. And I was like, no, but this is our chance to do a thing. And really, I was like, this is my chance.
Sure, yeah.
To break, out of this mold of just building other people's stuff. And slowly but surely got him hyped up, and we started working on this book. And Chris was super busy and had, an Image book as a thing is amazing if it's a big hit. But you have to dedicate months and months of time without any promise of money on the back end in terms of how well it's going to do. And it became very clear that we weren't going to be able to execute on this thing. We weren't going to be able to finish it. We weren't going to be able to do it. Chris drew like 11 pages, and I think it took him like 6 months. And I was just like, oh my God, we're never going to be able to do this thing. And so I threw the script in a drawer, and I was like, well, there goes that.
Yeah.
But artists were applying to the Udon studio all the time. And because I had taught at an art school, and then I was teaching at that point at an art school here in Toronto that I still teach at, this college called Seneca here in Toronto, I was constantly doing portfolio reviews. And this portfolio came in from this young kid in New York, and he really wanted to work for Udon, and his art was great. And it was the kind of thing where you just go, look, you just need to leave a little bit more room for word balloons.
Mm-hmm.
And your storytelling's good, your characters are solid, all that stuff. We're not currently hiring at the studio, but you're doing pro quality stuff. And he's like, oh, well, the reason why there's not enough room for word balloons is because I don't have a script. I'm just kind of drawing this out of my head.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, do you want to work from a script? He's like, great. Can you send me one of the Udon scripts? And I was like, I can't. We're not allowed to. The only script I've got is this fantasy thing that I did.
Yeah.
And I sent it to him, and I said, the artist drew like 11 pages. You can see what he did, and you'll learn, because he's a really, really good artist.
Yeah.
And they were all pencils. And the kid named Edwin Huang, like a couple days later, he sends me a couple pages of inks. He's like, I hope you don't mind. I printed out those pages from that artist, and I inked them because I wanted to learn. I was like, these look amazing. And he goes, is it okay if I ink the rest just for my own practice? I said, yeah, go for it. And then he got to page 11, and then he drew page 12, and then he inked it, and it looked really good. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, don't make me, don't, I've already kind of given up on this. Like, you're giving me hope, kid. This is too much. I don't know if I can handle it. And so I waited till he had 2 or 3 pages done past 11, and I sent them to Image, and I said, we're back on production. Is it okay? And they were like, sounds good. When you get a finished issue, we can put it on the schedule. Wow. And I was like, oh crap, we're making a book. And so I had to call him up, and I was like, look, I don't know if you have plans, because he was still in school at the time. He was at some illustration school in New York. Okay. I don't know if you have any plans right now, but if you want, it would be great. And he goes, man, I was going to ask you if it would be okay if we could make this a real book. And I said, that's exactly what I called. So yes, please. And so we made this comic series, Edwin and I, and the original artist, Chris, he would do covers. Okay. We got a colorist, and the letterer who was doing a bunch of stuff at Udon, I got him to letter the book. And we launched this book called Skull Kickers in 2010. Yeah. And that was suddenly me as a writer making my own thing again. Yep. And putting it out into the world. And the transformation I'm sure to me, it felt, much more immediate, but just people looking and saying, "Oh, you made this. Oh, you're a comic book creator
Right.
again," was
Yeah.
so intoxicatingly wonderful that I knew I couldn't stop. Like I had to make stuff, and I fell back in all the best kind of ways. And literally since 2010, I have written over 8,000 pages of comics.
Yeah. It's
So
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, but it like the weird, not even a false start, but like a start, made a thing, got scared,
Sure.
kind of kept my powder dry, but for way too long, and like gotta go. And then finally, the starter gun went off, and I
And
haven't really stopped. So
that thing, and I think it's really interesting because that happens more than it doesn't happen with people in this getting scared thing on the second thing. Like there's
yeah,
this there in it because it's not the assignment thing. It's not that
no,
somebody says, "Hey, here's a gig, here's another gig." You just do
right,
the gig because it's
right.
like, all right,
Well,
cool.
and there's a big chunk of my writing that is now obviously working on other people's
Sure.
stuff, but I'm creative in that,
Mhm.
I'm writing it, I'm coming up with the plot, I'm doing the thing.
Yeah.
And someone giving you a deadline is a hell of a motivator in a way that
Oh,
it's
for
harder
sure.
to get going for yourself.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
it's I mean, it's the same thing that, when you said, "Okay, well, these other people know that I'm doing this thing," when you were
Right.
doing your web comic,
Mhm.
that was your deadline because
Yes.
you were
Yes.
honoring that
Yes.
action to these people regardless of, compensation. It was
Yep.
just,
Yep.
"I'm gonna do this thing."
And
And
now there's this powerful thing now where I know an artist is waiting for a script and their livelihood is dependent on me getting that script done and getting it approved by editorial and getting it in their hands. And that is this constant push. And because I worked with clients for years and I worked with artists for years, I know that pressure, what it feels like if you don't have the material you need or the schedule is crumbling because people aren't doing their jobs. So it's like this weird form of motivation, adrenaline, guilt. Like, I'm doing this. I said I was going to do it. I know I can do it. And it forces me past that fear that used to sort of lock me in place when it was only myself that I had to, motivate.
yeah, when I was talking to a creator recently, an artist, and we were talking about like the sort of the mythological page a day kind of thing,
Right, right.
and he's like, yeah, and we were discussing the fact that like it's not just the page a day. You got to figure out
Right,
that page in a very like what's the quickest amount of time you can get that page done that you
right.
can live with for the day, and now figure out how to do 2 or 3 of those pages in a day because as you said, the crumbling schedules, well, that happens. Like, I mean, I would say,
Or just real life happens,
yeah,
you've
well,
got
yeah,
other things that just
for
take you,
sure.
that everything trying to take your attention away from doing the work. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, and sometimes people will say to me, they go, "I don't understand. You have a full-time teaching job." Like now a tenured prof at this
Mhm.
art college. Well, it's not even an art college, it's college. They've got all sorts of different courses, but the department I'm in is in art and animation. But you're a tenured prof teaching full time, and then you're writing, 5, 6 books at the same time. And it's
Right.
like, yeah. And they're like, how does that happen? And I said, well, there's a bunch of different factors involved. First of all, I don't have any pets and I don't have any kids, and I have a very patient wife.
Yeah.
As a second of all, when I sit down at the computer, there's no room for me to mess around.
Yeah.
Like in the evening, I got 3 hours. I got to get these pages done. I can't sit there and noodle. I got to just hunker down and go, well, if I don't get this done tonight, I'm definitely not getting the script done this week. And if I don't get this done this week, the log jam happens. The guilt will overtake me. I'll ruin everything and people will hate me for all time. Therefore, tonight's getting done. Like that's just what it is, Yeah.
Yeah. Do you now, I mean, dabbling into the process factor, like,
Sure.
do you like, I mean, do you hop in, like, do you do any like morning work, like to anything to get the day
Depends
started?
on the project. I'm a planner, right? There's planners and there's pantsers.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I'm very much a planner. Like I will break down an issue, however many pages it is. I have a document with 1 to whatever the number of pages, 1 to 20 pages on a typical Marvel issue, and I'm literally going scene by scene. Okay, this scene has to happen before that scene.
Yep.
That's where the page turn is. Okay, that's where the big splash page is going to be. I know all of that before I write the issue.
Yeah.
And even if it changes, and sometimes it does, you're scripting and you realize you got a better way of doing it. Now I'm just reordering bits rather than being like, I have no idea what's coming. You know what I mean? And so when I finally sit down to script, I've got an outline of the whole arc. I've got a page breakdown of each scene. I know the next 3 pages is this conversation between these characters.
Mhm.
And then it almost feels like a role-playing game. Like I'm the
Oh,
Avengers.
yeah,
What
yeah,
would Captain America say? What would Steve Rogers do? What would Tony Stark do? What would Wanda Maximoff do? They're in the scene together. What is driving them? By the end of this page, this has got to happen. How can I make this as engaging and entertaining as possible to move through these moments?
Well, it's that spotlight moment, because like the D&D thing is a great example, because like when I write, like as long as I've done my job well enough to create the environment and have a solid enough, premise of what's going on, the characters are going to make the story happen. Like they're
right.
the problem with me. And so like when you're playing D&D, like the DM has set up the whole environment. They've set the premise up. Each individual person is responsible for their character, but then that moment when the spotlight turns to you and you're holding your 20-sider, you've got it. This is it. Like you've only get
this is my cool moment.
Throw it out.
I think what's really interesting is like, it's also what motivates me to get character voices right.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'll read a book by a writer, and even when I like their writing, I feel their voice overwhelming all voices. Like everyone suddenly is the quip master, or everyone is erudite in a way that they wouldn't be normally. And you're like, man, you don't give a damn about any of these characters' personalities. You're just sort of steamrolling the you all over this. And for me, it's like, no, I want Clint Barton to sound like Clint Barton, and I want Natasha Romanoff to sound like Natasha Romanoff. Like I want these characters to be themselves, and that you believe in them more than it being like, oh, there's the Zub all over this thing. Like, ideally what a Jim Zub script is, it's great balance of action and bit of wry humor, or there's a sense of wonderment, or there's really cool big ideas that drive it, but not that my Steve Rogers sounds like my Thor, sounds like my Hulk, or whatever.
Yeah, totally. I think that's like, I totally agree, because I mean we have to, as a writer, and I mean as the artist, I mean like if you just drew the characters and just do a different costume on the same figure. I
mean, there are some artists that do that, obviously, right? But ideally you're striking some sort of a balance where it's like, this is clearly that character and they still feel like themselves, or the qualities that you're enhancing are the ones. Like I love a Humberto Ramos drawing that looks like Humberto Ramos drew it, but even his different characters have got, their silhouettes are different, and their body types and their personalities come through in those drawings.
Like when you see a certain person have a different shoulder slope, a different, different slouch, whatever.
Absolutely. And I love seeing those characters interpreted through their line, in their style. You know what I mean?
And the same works with writers, because what you want to do is you want to go like, oh, I really want to get, I want this Jim's version of, how does he make Daredevil?
Right. And what are the qualities? When I love doing research on the stuff before I'm writing any particular character. I'm rereading either my favorite stories or iconic stories of those characters, and I'm reading for writing, like research, is different from reading for fun. I've got a little notepad beside me, and I'm literally just taking down notes, and those notes are people, places, names, nicknames, sometimes a line of dialogue that really catches my attention, or questions that I have as I'm reading, or qualities that I notice about the character that I want to reinforce to myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I end up with these scratch notes of all these different characters, and then I look for, what is the through line? Because a lot of these characters, they've gone through so many different evolutions, and I sort of looking, okay, there are all kinds of different ways to do Peter Parker. What is my Peter Parker? And how many of these qualities that I think are important can I incorporate without? So it's distinctive in the sense it's my filtering, but they're all still qualities that have been there in the work previously. I'm not just randomly deciding, brand new things, or if I am, I have to justify them in the scope of the story that I'm building.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, it's not exactly the same sort of parallel, but like it's like when we hear a band that we love do a cover of a song that
Right.
you're like, oh, wow, love hearing how they've reinterpreted
Sure.
these same notes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just a different way of doing it, and
Well, or what can you do to move that character's story forward? Some of the best stories in these long running, superhero properties or pop culture characters, the ones we really remember are the stories that shake things up for them, right? Why is the death of Gwen Stacy so important?
Mhm.
Why is whatever Craven's Last Hunter, all these things, these stories that felt like they were transformative or engaging or doing something to the characters that you weren't supposed to do, or that maybe were a bridge too far. And that's kind of why we remember them, and that's why they're so iconic and powerful.
Yeah.
And so then you have to think to yourself, okay, it's all well and good to have Spider-Man punch out some muggers or whatever in an alleyway. That's not going to stick. That's not going to be memorable. What can I do to either make that scene feel extra special or more poignant or more interesting? Or what are we really going for the gusto over a longer span with this character? Like, I
Mhm.
don't want to be known as, oh, Jim's the writer who keeps the status quo, and you're just like, oh, he's very good at writing in
It's
the average
2010.
the average voice of this character, and they
Right.
do all the stuff they're supposed to.
Makes you feel like you're reading someone else's comic.
Yeah, you're like, well, kind of reminds you a little bit of Chris Claremont by Roger Stern with just a wee bit of Stan Lee mixed in there, and nothing ever shocking ever happens. You're like, you
Right.
don't want to be that, writer. You
No,
don't want to
no.
be, and so you also need to get out of your comfort zone. I think early on, I was worried about doing it properly, where it was like I wanted my editor's approval at Marvel. And
Mhm.
so I would write the most iconic or the most on the nose kind of version of those characters because I knew it would get approved,
Yeah.
right? And that meant I did it right. And that means that my story goes into the official handbook of the Marvel Universe as for real Marvel stuff. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And then I realized that you can give yourself guardrails that you shouldn't, where you're being too safe, too easy. Yep, I can hit a line drive just barely down the middle, and do it up, and no one will be displeased.
Right.
And you're like,
He got
okay,
paid.
but
Jim
will
got
they right, but will they remember? Will they
Yeah.
actually care the minute that they close that book? Will they be asking questions? Will they be, and it's not to say I'm not here to make fans hate me, but on the other hand,
Yeah.
they should feel something. Otherwise, why have I done this, right? If it's literally just, you know, held the line for another month, you're like,
Well,
whew,
I
good one,
like I talk a writer friend and I, we talk, and, she's very much focused on nothing being safe. She's like,
Right.
"The safe shit sucks,"
It
she's just
does. And so you need to, kind of, if I don't want to argue with my editors, but equally, I don't want them to be so comfortable that we're
right.
not having, like, when I send them a proposal, I want them to jump on a call with me because they've got questions. Like,
Right.
if they don't, you're just sort of like, what?
Right, and you
Yeah.
should also I mean, in that proposal, or the script, you're delivering the answer. Like, they
Right,
shouldn't
right,
they
right,
they shouldn't finish it and go like, "Zub's here to destroy us." Like, they're
right.
going like,
Of
"Oh my
course.
god, like, I thought you were off the rails, but will you pull it all back together?" And
Exactly,
this is
exactly.
where,
Right.
because it's like, it's the Temple of Doom, man, just zipping down those,
Right.
that
On the
stuff.
rail cars. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you want. You wanna be leaning off that edge and just going, "They're not gonna make it." But when you
Right.
do make it,
Right.
because you rolled that natural 20, it's a phenomenal moment, you know?
Right. And so that's kind of a thing that I think I've learned, where at first I wanted to be like doing it right and making sure I hit all the right check boxes.
Yeah.
And now I'm sort of like, okay, I want to be excited and a little nervous about what we're doing. I want to be pushing out to that weird kind of edge, or surprising myself and doing more of that kind of stuff, because those are the stories that hopefully will stick with people. And it's not to say, like, I don't need controversy for controversy's sake. Like, I'm not just doing this to, like, shock and awe you and make you hate my guts. But on
Right.
the other hand, if you're not talking about this book, why am I doing it? If you're not excited or intrigued or eager to get next month's issue, what the
Yeah.
hell? you
So
know? Yeah.
what were the, I mean, because like, that's all amazing insight,
Yeah.
in your own sense, but like we're often not as completely, self-aware in the moment of
Sure.
time. So like what were the things that like maybe brought that to your attention? Was it seeing like, were you like rereading something and going like, oh, like, or were you
I reread the Claremont X-Men run, and
that's
I
the first thing that
realized
popped in my head when you were
how
talking.
transformative it was, that
Yes.
from month to month, you didn't know what was gonna happen to those characters,
Yeah.
When Storm, goes to Japan and then has all those crazy adventures with Yukio and
Mhm.
goes from being the stoic goddess to the mohawk, clad punk, and you're
Right.
just like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah.
this is amazing. And it feels like a natural evolution of a character. And yet it's unbelievable the distance this character's crossed. Wolverine from like the monster to the samurai, all these kinds of amazing transformative moments of those characters where every month you felt like if you missed it, you missed something
Missed
important. So don't miss it, right?
it.
The relationships are in depth and they matter, and the romance is intense. And you're like, I want that. I want that kind of feeling. And that doesn't mean I'm going to do a poor man's Claremont, but it's like, I just need to be thinking in that way of taking swings, right?
Totally.
It's harder now in the sense that obviously these are larger corporate characters and larger IPs, and the characters are being used in so many different places that it's hard for them to give you permission to go wild with that stuff. One
Right.
of the things I was excited about, I wrote Champions, which is like the young heroes of Marvel, and these characters, they barely had any stories. You could read 50 issues and you'd have every Miles Morales story, you know what I mean? And so for me it was like, oh great, I could make the next iconic Miles Morales story. I could make the next iconic Kamala Khan story or
Yeah.
Sam Alexander or any of these characters, and kind of break them and rebuild them and try things. And so what I didn't anticipate was I had this old school kind of Marvel, like, I'm going to grind them under the wheels of these dramatic stories the way I loved it. And the younger audience, they were, I don't want to say traumatized. I guess I just did. They were like, kind of, why are you doing this to these characters? Like, why are you hurting these kids?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, no, that's what you do to Marvel characters. You grind them into mush and then they stand up, and that's why they're heroes. You know what I mean? And the previous run on the book was very, there were some stakes, but they were lower stakes and it was a more kind of a fun book.
Mhm.
And when I came on board, my editor Tom and I, we talked, and we kind of wanted old school Teen Titans, like Wolfman Perez.
Yep.
Let's batter these characters, and knock them down. And so I went in and I just knocked them all down. And
Yeah.
the readership was like, what the hell? Why is this guy such a dick? And I was like, I'm not a dick. I love these characters. I'm going to show you why they're heroes. I'm going to make them earn it. And a certain portion of the readership loved it, and a certain portion of the readership was like, this guy's a masochist. And it was kind of fascinating because
Well,
I was trying to emulate the books that blew my mind. You know what
yeah,
I
well,
mean?
that's, I
Yeah.
mean, that's the thing. I mean, like, if you think about those, first 3-4 years of Titans,
Yeah.
and also, the first 3 years of the New Mutants,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
books, like, I mean, neither one.
Trauma machines. They're
Oh my
just
God,
trauma machines. Oh
it was
yeah.
punishing, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
great. But like the funny thing is that like I think like when you get that response, like
But I
you're
think the difference too is the culture we're in now. I couldn't yell at Chris Claremont on social media.
no,
Would I have? Like, if I was a kid and they
yeah,
were doing that to the New Mutants, would I
sure,
have barked off to that guy? I
yeah,
don't know, because I can't imagine that scenario because I didn't have the internet as a kid, right?
right,
But now you can.
yeah,
Now the creator is not just a name on a credit or whatever, but you can contact them and give them a piece of your mind. And that's a fascinating thing. And it's good and it's bad and it's everything in between, right? Where
yeah,
someone can now tell me, I'm sure if I had met Claremont, I would be like, I can't believe you did that to, whatever. I get Madeline Pryor or any of these characters. Why are you so mean? But I didn't, you know what I mean? Because I was just letting the story happen because I had no control over it. And now the fandom has they have different levers, and that is cool. And it's also kind of weird, and I don't think it's wrong, but
No,
it changes the discourse, right?
it
Because
should,
now
it modifies the behavior of
when
the
you get pummeled by
yeah,
fans and dozens of them tell you you're a piece of crap,
yeah,
you can't help but sort of either there's some people who use that as an excuse to pull back, and there's
yeah.
other people who use that excuse to drive forward. They're like, I got a response out of you. Great. Watch this. I'll be even crueler next
Like
time.
you're
You know what I
feeling
mean?
it. But the thing is, it's like, I mean, the reaction that's happening isn't happening at the end of the story. Do you know what I mean?
Right, right,
No
right.
one's no one's reading the story and finishing
You
and
got
going
it.
like, okay,
You
now I
got
got
it.
to be mad about, midway
The
point. Like,
specific thing.
and
Yep,
what it
yep.
is that they're reacting to the feeling that's happening to them at the moment, which is completely justified and valid.
Sure.
But
And you're also like, look, there are so many writers and creators who want to create things that generate discussion.
yeah,
So if all that discussion isn't positive, but it's happening, you've done something amazing in the
for
sense
sure.
of you've created, art, and art evokes an emotion, and people are the reason why they're so dedicated to the Marvel universe is because they see themselves in it and they're excited by it and they're engaged by it. And so
Uh-huh.
when I'm writing, my first run on Thunderbolts, and Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, is one of the characters, and that's the only book that he's appearing in regularly when I'm writing it, as Civil War's coming out, and
Right.
everyone loves the Winter Soldier, and people are sending me fan mail, and they're like, we love Bucky, and please have him do more things. And there's a hardcore segment of the fan base that is also like, we think that he's in love with Steve Rogers, and you should have him get together with Steve. And you're like, I can't do that. Like, I have no control of
Right.
his those romantic decisions, especially on an IP and characters that are now, global. That
Yep.
it's not even just, even if I could justify it to my editor, there's 3 levels above them that are not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to me that your passion for these characters is filtered down to this point where I'm answering this fan mail or I'm getting this discussion. You know what I mean? Like, that is an incredible thing to be in the midst of at any particular point. You know what I mean?
So this is an interesting thing that I'm thinking about while you're saying this stuff is that a film has a very narrow duration, 2 hours.
Sure.
You're in, you're out. All the motion happens and it's done.
Right.
With a comic book run, people know that this is an extension. There's a lot of
Right.
stuff happening.
Months and months are going to go by. Yeah.
So their emotions are on tenterhooks ostensibly for a month period at a time. Do they
But
have
you've also got, I mean, but this is because the movies have such a bigger footprint.
oh yeah.
That's why you have this echoing outpouring of fan art and fan fiction and people making their own scenarios and imagining their own storylines and fan
Well,
casting movies
more
before they've
more
even been announced.
it is like there were people doing it 40 years ago,
Oh, sure. But now,
but there was nothing feeding it. There was
yeah.
nothing,
Well,
and
and you couldn't find your own tribe. Like, hopefully you'd find 2 or 3 people you could have a discussion with,
sure.
but now you can find hundreds, and you can argue about it, and you can,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, confirmation bias is a wonderful thing.
it's wild. It's amazing. Yeah.
But here's the thought is if someone's going back and rereading Claremont's runs or reading the
Right.
Tides, are they stopping in the middle of that trade paperback
And
and
getting, yeah,
an angry tweet to Marvel?
sure.
No, they're not, because they see a final part to it because there's a
Right.
back
Right.
cover.
Right. Right.
And there is no back cover on the monthly thing. They don't know if if the next issue is the
Is
last
this the new
issue
normal?
or
Right.
7, right.
Yeah. But what's fascinating is, on the one hand, you're in the middle of the magic trick, but it's going to take 6 months, and someone's yelling at you, and you don't want to say, the rabbit's not dead.
Right,
Don't worry about it. It'll
right.
come out of the hat.
No, because
Like,
then
I don't want to say,
yeah,
don't worry, guys. Good guys are going to beat the villains. The
yeah,
fact
right.
that you're so mad at me that you
It's a
think the
huge
villains are going to
achievement.
win is amazing. That you're
Yes,
yelling at me on Twitter
yeah,
or something because I took away the thing when it's obvious. It should be obvious. Should it be obvious? I don't know. To
well,
someone who writes, you think and go, well, they're not going to let that guy stay dead, or they're not
right,
going to do that thing. I'm fascinated to see how they're going to pull this out.
Yeah.
But a segment of the fandom, whether they are, I don't know if it's naivety or whatever, it's fascinating. But if you'd have asked me when I was 12 or 13, I probably would have thought they're really dead too. You know what I mean? So, but I had no outlet to tell people.
No, yeah, but
Right?
we had to struggle and suffer with our
If a character showed up in the handbook of the Marvel Universe in the deceased section,
oh
that
my,
was as permanent as it got. They were really friggin' dead.
that's a really good point. Like that really would, that's because that's canon, you know.
It's
You're like,
it's in the encyclopedia
yeah,
that says this is the stuff,
this
and
is
it
it.
shows the deceased date.
Yeah,
So the first couple times a character would get resurrected and they were no longer in that deceased portion, there was a part of me that felt cheated. Like,
yeah,
wait, no, but you said they were dead in the book where it says
yeah.
all the
I
things,
got it right here.
That's
Yeah,
right. And then you when the curtain gets pulled and you go, it doesn't matter. Like,
yeah,
justify it in the creative decisions, and the editors change and someone says that is a good idea. You
yeah.
should bring that character back. Yeah,
Why
yeah,
not?
yeah.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I mean, it's a thing because I mean, listen, there are only so many Lego shapes,
Right.
and like each one of those
But the
characters.
difference as well, again, when we were kids, we didn't have the entire archive in front of us,
No,
right?
no,
So now you've got someone can go through and they can literally count the number of Christmases and go, wait a minute, these characters aren't 70 years old.
right.
And you're like, don't worry about who the president was. Don't worry about the bell bottoms. Don't worry about the,
Yep.
80s crop tops and all that stuff.
Yeah.
The leg warmers, and that you have to kind of ignore that.
And
All we
punks
know
are
is,
bad guys. All the
they
bad
fought.
guys are punks.
That's right. They fought Dr. Octopus a lot of times. They've
Yeah,
fought many times. That's all you need to know.
yeah,
And then you can make a reference to the fact that, Dr. Otto Octavius tried to marry Aunt May. Don't worry about what era that was or what the music was playing or what pop culture references there were. It happened. Okay, cool. Got it.
yeah. Just carry on. So when you get when do you get your, if you've got, give yourself 3 hours, if you're
Right.
if you're writing after dinner till bedtime ish, is
Right.
bedtime your reading time for research or
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So what I'm usually doing is I'm loading up reference PDFs and stuff I get from Marvel onto my tablet, and then I'm sitting in bed and I'm reading, a handful of issues before I crash out. When I'm heading up to the school, I take the subway up to the York University campus. I've got about 45 minutes to an hour, depending
Okay,
on
good.
whatever, and I'm just sitting there on the train and I'm reading and writing, there as well, there and back, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting now. So like it's interesting because what the fear is as a writer writing comic books of existing IP is that you don't want to be sort of eating your own children in that respect.
Sure.
So, so where do you find your story outside of the comic verse in that sense?
In terms of finding ideas for stories?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying where do you find your stories, Jim?
Yeah.
But it's like, but the thing is like that's where all the like I know, like I have to like always consciously like pay attention to stuff.
Sure.
So I'm getting things that are outside of like just science fiction and fantasy.
Oh, totally. I mean, everything from whatever, the news to crazy conversations, you're writing little bits down. You're writing bits down about different conflicts happening in the world, or weird science that you read about, or some little bit or piece. And then you couple that with the research that you're doing on the specific characters in their world, and weird, sparks as you jam these things together start to sort of pop up, where you say to yourself, well, this has always been like this. Does it always have to be like this? Do you know what I mean? Or these are the core traits of the character. How do we test those? Right. So, the classic one is, with great power, there must also come great responsibility, which is the Spider-Man origin story. Well, so you have to put Peter Parker in situations where he proves his responsibility, where he makes hard decisions, and there is doubt in terms of which decision he will make and why. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the obvious one, but are there new ways to do that? Always. There's always new ways to do that. There's always new choices that need to be made. There's always dark, hallways that Peter can go down and then pull himself back from the brink. Right. And so you just have to try and figure out what those are. And then with a character like Spider-Man, where there are hundreds and hundreds of stories, you can narrow the filter by saying, well, it's going to be this villain. Well, thank God there's way less stories with that villain. So now I can sort of filter for that particular character and kind of go, well, what have we not seen in that particular conflict with that particular villain?
Yeah.
I did a Batman story for Legends of the Dark Knight. And when someone says, hey, do you want to do a Batman story? You say yes. And then you get off the phone and then you get, dry heaves, because you're like, how am I going to tell a Batman story that's not same old, same old? Like, how can I do something that hasn't been done before? Like, what's left? Batman shovels his driveway with snow. Batman eats a taco. Like, I don't know. Like, and so you start freaking out, and then you go, wait. There is a rogues gallery. Okay, if I narrow it to a villain, now I have a focal point, and it's Batman reacting to what the villain's doing, and I can do something that hasn't been done before with that villain. And now we have a bit of a different Batman story, instead of it just being like, how can I tell the ultimate Batman story?
Right. Because the majority of the stories weren't, those things were ideas that percolated and developed, and someone says, hey, I've got this great idea. And then you're, rather than saying, here's an assignment, come up with something. And
and it's, it's then also your ability to write these iconic characters several times and build up your own understanding and voice for them before you really go, okay, I can strike right at the heart of everything that makes this character perfect.
Unless you're Frank.
Sure, unless you're Frank. There was they did Marvel Comics 1000. And that was this incredible book where most of the writers got one page to do a story. And so you could do something, most people did kind of goofy stuff or very iconic stuff, because what else have you got time for, right? I did a Blade story, and it's basically a pun. It's like a joke. And it's like, well, I got to do Blade. That was fun. And then Brad Meltzer did one of the most beautiful, perfect Spider-Man stories, heartwarming, touching, almost makes you want to cry, in one page. And I was just like, that's why he's a real writer, and I'm just some hack. What the hell, man? Like, what the hell? It's so beautiful. It's so brilliant. And you're just like, okay, every so often inspiration strikes and you realize you've got something really valuable or important to say, and go for the gusto. You know what I mean? And it's like, all right, never take any of that for granted. Like, next time I get to do one of these kind of anniversary books or whatever, I did it's coming out in a couple months. There's the digital, comics that they do. And the good thing is that you can pick, sort of, for the team books, you can pick kind of characters you don't normally get the spotlight. So there's an Avengers digital story I've got coming out, and it's all about Jarvis.
Oh, cool.
The guy who takes care of the Avengers mansion. And there's something very simple and sweet and beautiful about it. And I'm really, really proud of it. And it turned out amazing. It's it's the kind of story that would be in the back of an Avengers annual, and people would remember it. And years from now, they'd go, there's this great story that's all about, and I know that sounds very cocky to say that, but I'm super, super proud of it. And it hits those emotional beats that I wanted. And it all kind of just delivers. And I'm like, I got to do more like that. Like, if I get the chance to do those little offbeat stories, punch you right in the heart and go for it, because that's the stuff that's going to stick around with people.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, is that you're the whole, I guess, our goal when writing is to get to that character and the essence of that character to the reader, and make the reader want to be in that character's foot.
Absolutely. I'm writing this new run on Thunderbolts, and it's ostensibly it's Hawkeye's book. Him trying to pull together this team that he didn't assemble, and make it work. And he's got this midlife crisis element of, man, the only time I can remember being happy was when I was running the West Coast Avengers.
I thought that was a great reference.
Let's get the West Coast Avengers back together. And then he doesn't get them, but he gets a different team. And it's sort of like, well, I asked for a team and I got a team. I got to make, got to spin this, into gold, and trying not to screw it up. But all eyes are on him, and this very public facing thing, and all of his own kind of misgivings and problems and internal and external kind of issues are going to haunt him through this miniseries. And I'm really, really excited for people to see how it all plays out. And some of it is very much the comics I grew up on, the superhero stuff that I love, and other parts of it are kind of very wacky isms of modern Marvel that I like, you
Yeah.
know. And I went into it and just said, I'm going to write a superhero book that I would have loved as a reader and that I would love now as a reader. And if people like it, then their qualities, you know, are very much in line with my own. And if they don't like it, cool, man. There's nothing I can do about that. Like, I've just got to write the book that I think is awesome, and that's what's gonna matter, you know.
Yeah. No, you sent me the first issue, and the kickoff is great.
Thanks, man.
I love the whole, you know, getting the band back together thing.
Yeah, and in the introduction of characters, old or new, in ways where you instantly know what their baseline is and what they want and why they're there. And that's what a good team book and a good first issue felt like to me when I was growing up.
Yep.
And I feel like sometimes, because they hit the reset button so often on these comics, a first issue just feels like another random issue. And so you don't have a sense of, here's a starting position. And so I said, no, we're going to have a distinct starting position, and we're going to create a framework, a narrative framework, to have Clint learn about these people as the reader learns about them, so we can get our, you know, exposition loaded in a way that's funny and entertaining and gets everyone in a forward, you know, momentum. And that was really what I wanted. So to me, it's like, I think it's one of the best superhero scripts I've written. I think it's one of the best first issues I've written, because it does all the things that I wanted it to do. And then Sean Isaac, the amazing artist I work with, he delivered on the storytelling and all the little fun expressions and everything else. And so you put it all together, it's like, yeah, that's what I think a good superhero comic is. And if you like it, then we're probably already friends. You just don't know it yet. You know, like that's kind of how I feel about the book. And
totally. And
yeah.
I think you did a great thing when you were saying, like, you know, we the reader gets to, you know, to kind of learn along with you. But the beauty, I think, what you did is you baked in a handful of characters who already know. So, you know, Luke and the marketing people, they already know. So what they're going to do is they're going to be able to pull strings. They're going to be able to give us that sort of information off sort of camera from the main character and the story. And I think so it's great. So you can really do a whole lot of, you know, they're not going to like it when they get there, but listen, we have to do this. And
exactly.
And the reader's like, what do you mean? You know, and then we get to see what Clint's reaction to it is. It's a clever way.
It was fun. It was a really fun book to put together, and I'm really stoked for people to read the upcoming issues. Every issue's got fun little twisty bits and fun character moments and a lot of warmth and a lot of heart. Like, when I pitched it to Marvel, I very much had this idea of, like, let's do, you know, Avengers by way of Ted Lasso. Like, let's make a lot of heart. Let's make a lot of, you know, characters struggling against themselves as much as they're struggling against external forces. And that's very much the headspace of Clint in this. Like, he's not the best guy for the job, but he's the guy doing the job, and he's got to figure out how to be the best one for it. And there's something fun about that. There's something very real about that. And you sort of lean into it, and a lot of fun character bits come out of it. And so, yeah, just trying to make, I feel like my early kind of writing career was very much like, I'm going to hit all the check boxes and do the things the way you're supposed to. And now I feel more confident. Like, I'm writing a book I think is great, and I can tell you why I think it's great. And if I get enough excitement, the art team and the editorial, everyone's going to be in the right headspace, and we're just going to charge for it. You know,
listen, the magic, the magic sauce, when we call it the Zub sauce or the Zub rub, I mean, the point is that, like, what you want is when you're reading something, or if you can feel the excitement of the person who created the thing, it's worth its weight in gold, and it translates, and that's what you aim for.
When you read the Dungeons and Dragons comics, you know how much I love D&D.
Yeah.
When you read Conan the Barbarian, hopefully what you feel is decades worth of my own excitement for the Hyborian Age and growing up reading those books and reading those Roy Thomas comics and everything else, right? When you read this upcoming, I'm doing Unbreakable Red Sonja for Dynamite, and it's like, that's a character I think is really awesome. And she's in the Hyborian Age, and we're going to show you how she's different from Conan and what she does and why she's so amazing and why the character has lasted as long as she has. You know what I mean? We just announced Rick and Morty versus Cthulhu, and it's like, love love Lovecraft stuff and all of its weird insanity and its quirkiness and its awfulness, and it's like the cosmic sort of relentless horror of it. But now we're able to sort of lovingly and cruelly elbow drop it because it's Rick and Morty, and we're going to tear it apart, and we're going to talk about Lovecraft the racist and Lovecraft the paranoid schizophrenic and like all these things, and kind of go, look, it's all these things, and it's under the spotlight of, we know the genre tropes, and that's why we can deconstruct them and mess with them and mess with your mind. And so all the projects I'm working on right now have got that kind of quality to them, where they're things that I care deeply about. And I'm going to try and transfer that energy through my brain out the keyboard into the page. And when the artist reads it, they're having a good time. And when the reader reads it, they're having the best time.
Yeah, so, that's the way to do it, my friend.
That's the plan. That's the goal.
That's awesome. So, what's the timeline for people to see all the stuff, and how long is the miniseries?
So Thunderbolts just launched September, so it's 5 issues. So we're going to be running through December.
Right?
Oh no, it was August, end of August. So it's through December. I've got Unbreakable Red Sonja launches next month, October.
Sweet.
I think the first issue will be out in time for New York Comic Con, which I will be at. I've got Rick and Morty versus Cthulhu launches in December. I've got Murder World that Ray Fox and I are co-writing at Marvel, which is like an insane take on everyone's favorite, murderous game show host at Marvel. That is an insane pitch that he and I came up with. That pitch is old enough to vote. We came up with that pitch 18 years ago and pitched it to Joe Quesada when we had no credits. We had a friend who was a contact who knew Joe and got it in front of him. And the feedback we got was essentially, this sounds kind of neat. Who the hell are these people?
Right.
Like, why would your first writing credit be a Marvel book? That's insane.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to have it all come back around. So we're doing this 5-issue thing called Murder World. That launches November. Rick and Morty Cthulhu's December. And then next year, I'm relaunching Conan the Barbarian at Titan. So I'm the flagship Conan writer coming out of the gate there. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Other than that, nothing. Pretty bored.
Okay. Just chilling out, watching.
Yeah.
Chilling and watching Netflix. I guess that's
yeah. It's good. It's good. So lots of fun stuff.
That's great.
I'm really pumped for it. Yeah. Having a blast.
Super exciting. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Hopefully people found it interesting. We tripped through some interesting corridors and some neat little bits about my mentality on the thing. So
yeah. And all the contact stuff, how to find you online.
Jimzub.com. Super simple.
It'll all be in the doobly-doo. They can find this stuff.
Awesome.
It's the magic days of now.
That's right.
Later, and have a good one.
Take care.